A sudden hush falls over the cathedral as a crown slips from trembling hands. Coronation days are meant to be perfect, a flawless display of power and tradition. Yet throughout history, these grand spectacles have been hilariously and sometimes tragically derailed by chaos. You are about to witness the most spectacular royal blunders, from fainting monarchs and misplaced crowns to fiery riots and political protests. By the end, you will understand the immense pressure of the crown and the human vulnerability hidden beneath the robes and jewels. How did a simple ring cause a queen agony? And why did one king's celebration end with the city in flames? What does it truly take for a single person to bear the weight of a crown? Even the most carefully planned ceremonies can unravel in an instant. King Edward VII's coronation in 1902 was meant to be a grand affirmation of a new era. Yet, just days before the event, the king fell gravely ill with appendicitis. The ceremony was postponed, and the nation held its breath. When the day finally arrived, Edward was still desperately weak, having only recently undergone a life-saving operation. He could barely stand, let alone bear the immense physical weight of St. Edward's crown, the solid gold symbol of monarchy used for centuries. A swift, hushed decision was made. He would be crowned with the lighter, more delicate imperial state crown instead. But that was only the first problem in a cascade of errors. As the king prepared himself, a wave of panic swept through the officials at Westminster Abbey. A critical case containing the very crown jewels to be used in the ceremony had been mistakenly sent to the wrong location. Instead of being safely in the annex, it was locked away in St. James's Palace. Messengers were frantically dispatched, racing through the London streets to retrieve the national treasures. Inside the abbey, the delay stretched from minutes into a full hour. The assembled nobles and foreign dignitaries began to murmur, their quiet whispers echoing through the vast space. Rumors of the king's poor health had already been circulating, and now this inexplicable holdup suggested something was terribly wrong. The anxiety was palpable, transforming a day of celebration into one of high-stakes stress. The officials backstage were in a sheer frenzy, trying to maintain an air of calm dignity while internally scrambling. Every second felt like an hour as they waited for the priceless regalia to arrive. This was not a minor oversight. It was a monumental blunder that threatened to undermine the entire spectacle. Imagine the scene, the organ music filling the air, the congregation growing increasingly restless, and a handful of men in formal dress sweating through their uniforms, praying for a solution. Finally, the case arrived and the ceremony proceeded, but the damage was done. The world saw not an invincible monarch, but a frail man in a flustered institution. It was a stark reminder that behind the glittering pageantry, human error and vulnerability are always waiting in the wings. That sense of human frailty echoed even more profoundly decades earlier, during the coronation of a young queen who should have been the picture of youthful vigor. Queen Victoria's ascension in 1838 was a national event, a celebration of a new, young monarch after a line of aging kings. Yet the ceremony itself descended into a series of charming but deeply unsettling blunders, all born from one critical failure. No one had properly rehearsed. The result was a day less of polished spectacle and more of painful improvisation. The first sign of trouble came during the act of homage, when the elderly Lord Rolle, a peer in his 80s, approached the steps to the throne. His legs gave way, and he tumbled down the shallow staircase, creating a wave of gasps and sympathy throughout Westminster Abbey. The young queen, moved by the incident, immediately stepped forward to help him, a spontaneous act of kindness that broke from all rigid protocol. But the physical discomfort was not reserved for the nobility alone. Next came a moment of sheer agony for Victoria herself. The Archbishop of Canterbury, perhaps flustered by the earlier mishap, proceeded to force the coronation ring onto her finger. This ring, a symbol of her marriage to the nation, had been sized for her pinky. He mistakenly forced it onto her fourth finger. The pain was excruciating as the gold band was jammed onto the wrong digit, and the queen would later write in her journal about the lasting soreness it caused. The confusion did not end there. Later in the lengthy service, the Bishop of Bath and Wells, apparently lost in the complex order of events, turned a page too early in his program. He mistakenly gave the queen the signal that the ceremony was over. Obediently, Victoria rose and began to walk out, only to be called back in front of the entire bewildered assembly. She had to return to her throne to complete the final anticlimactic prayers. The entire affair, while endearing in its humanity, was a masterclass in disorganization. It showcased a profound truth that even the most sacred traditions are helpless against simple human error, leaving a young woman to bear not just the symbolic weight of the crown, but the very real pain of a badly managed ritual. The pressure of a crown is immense enough without the world literally catching fire around you. Centuries before Victoria's painful ring or Edward's misplaced jewels, a coronation was nearly consumed by flames. On Christmas Day in the year 1066, Westminster Abbey was packed for the coronation of William the Conqueror. This was not a simple celebration. It was a tense political statement. William was a Norman king being crowned in a recently conquered England, and the air was thick with suspicion and fear. The English nobility and the Norman occupiers were gathered under one roof, a volatile mix of resentment and raw power. Inside the abbey, the ceremony proceeded with all the solemnity the Normans could muster. When the congregation inside raised their voices in a shouted acclamation for the new king, a traditional part of the service, the sound boomed through the ancient stone walls. But to the Norman guards stationed outside, a force of nervous and heavily armed soldiers who did not speak the local language, that roar of English voices sounded like the beginnings of a violent uprising. Acting on pure instinct and fear, they took drastic action, setting fire to the surrounding buildings as a preemptive strike against what they thought was a rebellion. Within moments, thick, black smoke began to seep into the abbey. The shouts of acclamation turned to screams of genuine terror as the congregation saw the smoke and panicked, believing the building itself was on fire. A stampede erupted as nobles, clergy, and knights all rushed for the doors, desperate to escape the imagined inferno. Through it all, William the Conqueror, the man at the very center of the storm, was left almost alone at the altar. He was visibly trembling, but he refused to flee. He insisted the ceremony continue, and so the final sacred rites were performed amidst choking smoke and the sounds of chaos outside. He was crowned the King of England not in a moment of divine tranquility, but in a maelstrom of fear and confusion. This fiery welcome was seen by many as a powerful and unlucky omen, a forecast of the brutal and tumultuous reign that would follow. It was a stark lesson that the weight of a crown is not just about bearing a heavy object, but about holding steady while everything around you descends into chaos. While William trembled amidst the smoke, another king's coronation was stained not by fire, but by blood. Richard I, the legendary Lionheart, was crowned in Westminster Abbey in 1189. He was a warrior king, a celebrated military leader, and his entire focus was fixed on a single grand ambition: leading the Third Crusade to reclaim Jerusalem. His coronation was meant to be a swift prelude to his glorious departure, but it instead became a dark omen for his reign. The day was disrupted by a deeply sinister event. A delegation of prominent Jewish leaders arrived at the abbey, bearing traditional gifts to honor the new monarch. But they were met not with welcome, but with violent prejudice. Fanatical court officials and members of the public, whipped into a frenzy by crusading fervor and bigotry, barred them from entering. They accused the Jewish community of sorcery and treachery, and the refusal of their gifts quickly spiraled into a full-scale riot. The streets of London erupted in a horrific pogrom. Mobs attacked the Jewish quarter, looting homes and setting them ablaze. Many were murdered in their own houses, while others were forcibly dragged into the streets and beaten to death. The violence was so widespread and brutal that it took days for order to be restored. This massacre was a grim foreshadowing of what was to come. Richard the Lionheart's reign would last 10 years, yet he would spend only a few months of it in England. He viewed his kingdom not as a home to be nurtured, but as a bank to be drained. The immense cost of his crusade and his later ransom, after he was captured on his return journey, required staggering sums of money. He bled the country dry with relentless taxation, famously quipping that he would have sold the city of London itself if he could have found a buyer. His coronation day, meant to be a unifying ceremony, had instead exposed a deep vein of intolerance and violence that he did nothing to heal. The king who was crowned amidst such brutality would rule as an absentee landlord, leaving his people to bear the financial and social costs of his distant wars. The crown was placed upon his head, but his heart and his treasure were always destined for a holy land far away. Sometimes the greatest disasters happen before the crown even touches a monarch's head. The coronation of King George VI in 1937 was born not from a peaceful succession, but from a seismic scandal that nearly toppled the British monarchy itself. His older brother, King Edward VIII, had reigned for less than a year before abdicating the throne to marry the American divorcee Wallis Simpson. The sudden, shocking departure of a king left a void filled not with celebration, but with national anxiety. Into this crisis stepped the new king, a man who had never expected or wanted the crown. He was a painfully shy individual, known to his family as Bertie, who battled a severe stammer that made public speaking a form of torture. The monarchy was wounded, its reputation for stability shattered, and the entire institution now rested on the shoulders of a reluctant, nervous successor. The coronation ceremony, a spectacle of unity and continuity, was now a test of survival. Making the pressure even more intense was a cruel logistical irony. The entire event had been meticulously planned for Edward VIII. Every detail, from the music to the procession, had been designed with his preferences and personality in mind. And now, with just a few short months to prepare, everything had to be altered for a completely different man. For George VI, this was not merely a ceremony. It was a performance he had to master under the world's most unforgiving spotlight. His every move would be scrutinized, his every word listened for signs of weakness. The nation needed to see a confident, unwavering king, not a man struggling with his own voice. The day of the coronation was a supreme test of his will. As he walked into Westminster Abbey, the weight of the crown's expectations was almost physical. Millions listened on the radio, their ears tuned not just to the ancient prayers, but to the cadence of his speech. And then he began to speak. With immense concentration and the support of his speech therapist, he delivered his lines. There was no faltering, no debilitating stammer. He navigated the complex, hours-long ritual with a quiet, resolute dignity that resonated deeply with a public yearning for stability. His success was not in a flawless performance, but in a deeply human one. He did not hide his struggle. He overcame it in full view of the world. That coronation day became a personal triumph, transforming a king defined by his insecurities into a symbol of resilience. It was a powerful lesson that the greatest royal spectacles are not about avoiding disaster, but about steering a nation through it. That quiet dignity shown by King George VI stands in stark contrast to another coronation, one defined not by resilience, but by rigid, exhausting spectacle. For Russia's last Tsar, Nicholas II, his coronation in 1896 was less a celebration and more a grueling marathon of endurance. The ceremony inside Moscow's Uspensky Cathedral stretched for a staggering 4 hours, a test of physical and mental fortitude that few could withstand. The young Tsar and his new Tsarina, Alexandra, were required to stand almost the entire time, bearing the immense physical burden of their imperial regalia. His robe, woven with thick gold thread and lined with heavy ermine fur, was so colossal it required multiple attendants just to carry its train. Atop his head sat the historic imperial crown of Russia, a masterpiece of jeweler's art set with thousands of diamonds in a colossal red spindle. It was beautiful, but its weight was punishing, a constant, pressing reminder of the burden he was now sworn to carry. Every movement was dictated by ancient rites, a complex sequence of prostrations, blessings, and symbolic gestures that had to be performed with absolute precision. There was no room for a misstep, no moment of relief. This was not a ceremony designed for human comfort. It was a theatrical display of divine power, meant to portray the Tsar as an infallible ruler chosen by God. Yet for the participants, it was simply agonizing. The Tsarina, known for her delicate health, grew visibly pale and faint as the hours dragged on. Court officials watched with growing anxiety, fearing she might collapse at any moment under the suffocating weight of her own jewels and robes. The entire event was a masterpiece of imperial theater, but it revealed a profound disconnect. While the royal couple endured their gilded ordeal, the people outside were experiencing a very different kind of suffering. The coronation festivities for the public would soon spiral into one of the deadliest disasters in royal history, a tragedy born from neglect and a chilling disregard for human life. The crown placed upon Nicholas's head that day was not just heavy, it was already tipping towards a terrible fall. The gilded ordeal inside the cathedral was merely the prelude to a far darker chapter. To celebrate his coronation, Tsar Nicholas II had ordered vast public festivities on Moscow's Katinka Field. The promise was intoxicating: free beer, sausages, pretzels, and a special commemorative gift for every person, a porcelain cup engraved with the imperial crest. The news spread like wildfire, and by the night before the event, over 500,000 people had crowded into the edges of the field, a massive, restless sea of humanity waiting for the dawn. The planning, however, was criminally negligent. The field itself was a poor choice, a former military training ground riddled with hidden trenches and deep ditches. The organizers had erected only a single, flimsy wooden fence to separate the crowds from the hundreds of small stalls holding the gifts and food. There were no proper police lines, no crowd control measures, and no safe avenues for entry or exit. As the sun began to rise, a rumor shot through the crowd that there were not enough gifts or drinks for everyone. That single, unsubstantiated whisper was all it took to trigger a cataclysm. The immense crowd surged forward as one, a terrifying, unstoppable wave. People at the front were slammed against the frail wooden barriers, which splintered and gave way instantly. Those who stumbled were trampled in an instant, their bodies becoming a carpet for the thousands behind them who, pushed by an invisible force, had no choice but to walk over the fallen. The hidden ditches became death traps, filling with layers of suffocating victims. In the span of just 15 minutes, over 1,300 people were crushed or asphyxiated to death, with thousands more gravely injured. The morning air, which should have been filled with celebration, was pierced instead by the screams of the dying and the horrified cries of those trying to help. The Tsar was informed of the tragedy that morning, yet that very evening, he made a decision that would define his reign. He chose to attend a lavish, pre-scheduled ball at the French embassy. He was advised that canceling could be seen as a diplomatic insult, so he went, and was even photographed smiling and dancing with the aristocracy while the city morgues overflowed with his subjects. That single act of perceived callousness earned him the enduring nickname Nicholas the Bloody, a stain of indifference that would never wash away. The crown, so carefully placed on his head just days before, was now permanently tarnished, not by the weight of gold, but by the weight of his own detachment. A monarch's greatest fear is not the political intrigue or the weight of a crown, but the treachery of a freshly waxed floor. The coronation ritual is a minefield of physical hazards, where a simple misstep can transform sacred dignity into public spectacle. One of the most poignant examples came with Italy's last king, Umberto II, in 1946. His reign would last a mere 34 days, and his coronation seemed to foreshadow his precipitous fall from power. As he ascended the steps to take his oath, his foot slipped on the highly polished marble. He stumbled, catching himself just in time, but the moment was captured by watchful eyes. In a ceremony meant to project unwavering stability, that single slip became a powerful, unintended symbol of a monarchy on the verge of collapse. The stumble was a stark reminder that no amount of regal training can fully conquer the physics of silk slippers on a slick surface. This was not an isolated incident. Throughout history, the very architecture of power has been a silent adversary. The coronation chair itself, used for centuries in British ceremonies, is positioned atop a raised dais with steps that have been trod by nervous monarchs for generations. The combination of immense, cumbersome robes and the need to climb or descend while maintaining a serene composure is a recipe for disaster. A long, heavy train of velvet and ermine can easily catch underfoot, while the sheer bulk of the garment restricts movement, turning a graceful ascent into a cautious, awkward shuffle. Uneven stone steps, worn down by centuries of use, present another hidden danger. A slight dip or an unexpected height could easily throw off the balance of a monarch already burdened by the psychological pressure of the moment. Imagine the sheer concentration required, every muscle tensed not in prayer, but in a desperate effort to remain upright. The eyes of the world are upon you, and a single trip could define your entire reign in the public memory, overshadowing the sacred vows with a moment of purely human clumsiness. These literal stumbles reveal a profound truth about the nature of monarchy itself. The ceremony is designed to present the sovereign as a figure divinely appointed, set apart from ordinary human frailty. Yet a slip, a trip, or a fall shatters that illusion in an instant. It exposes the person beneath the robes, a vulnerable individual subject to the same laws of gravity as everyone else. In that fleeting moment of imbalance, the gap between the celestial image of a king and the mortal reality of a man is closed, often with a jarring and unforgettable thud. Yet even the most flawless choreography could not prevent a startling cry of protest from echoing through the sacred space. During Queen Elizabeth II's coronation in 1953, an event watched by millions and guarded with unprecedented security, a single man turned the ceremony into a stage for political dissent. His name was Meredith Edwards, a schoolteacher and a fervent Welsh nationalist. Disguised in the robes of a choir member, he had managed to infiltrate the heart of Westminster Abbey, blending seamlessly with the other singers. As the grand procession of the young queen moved through the nave, a moment of perfect silence descended before the final hymns. It was in that hushed anticipation that Edwards rose to his feet. He did not sing. Instead, he shouted a demand for Welsh independence, his voice ringing out clear and sharp against the ancient stone pillars before the stunned congregation could even process what was happening. For a few heartbeats, there was only a frozen, disbelieving silence. Then the spell broke. Officials and clergy rushed toward him, swiftly grabbing his arms and forcibly removing him from the abbey as the orchestral music swelled to cover the commotion. The breach was monumental. This was not an outside demonstrator held back by police lines. This was a man who had slipped through every layer of security, from background checks to personal identification. He had been inside the inner sanctum, standing just feet away from the monarch at the most vulnerable and sacred moment of her life. The embarrassment for the organizers was profound, a stark and public failure that proved no amount of planning could fully shield the monarchy from the turbulent currents of the real world. The crown, for all its symbolic power, remained utterly human in its vulnerability to a single, determined voice. The sacred mystery of the coronation was about to meet the unblinking eye of the television camera. For Queen Elizabeth II's ceremony in 1953, a fierce battle erupted behind the palace walls over a single revolutionary question: should this most ancient of rites be broadcast to the world. Traditionalists, led by the formidable Prime Minister Winston Churchill, argued passionately that television would vulgarize the event, stripping it of its spiritual gravitas and turning a holy sacrament into mere public entertainment. They feared the cameras would expose every tiny human flicker, every moment of quiet contemplation, and in doing so, diminish the divine authority of the crown itself. The very soul of the monarchy seemed to hang in the balance, caught between centuries of secluded tradition and the dawn of a new, transparent age. Yet the young queen herself, with a surprising instinct for the modern world, ultimately overruled her elders. She believed the people had a right to see the ceremony, a decision that would forever change the relationship between the crown and the public. This approval unleashed a logistical nightmare for broadcasters. Westminster Abbey was a cavernous, shadowy space, a terrible environment for the primitive television technology of the era. Engineers had to devise a way to run miles of bulky, obtrusive cable through the ancient building without damaging the structure or ruining the aesthetic. They built special, discreet camera boxes high in the triforium galleries, hoping to make the technology as invisible as possible to those in the abbey. The greatest fear was an unscripted close-up. What if a camera caught the young queen in a moment of fatigue or confusion or physical strain? What if she stumbled under the weight of St. Edward's crown, a moment of human weakness that the entire world would see? The clergy, too, were under unprecedented pressure, every mumbled prayer and every ritual movement now subject to global scrutiny. The presence of the cameras added a new, invisible weight to the already heavy robes. The coronation was no longer a ceremony for God and the assembled peers. It was a performance for millions. When the day arrived, an estimated 27 million people in Britain alone gathered around television sets, with millions more listening on the radio across the globe. They did not see a distant, untouchable figure, but a young woman solemnly taking her vows. The broadcast did not cheapen the event, it democratized it, creating a shared national experience that strengthened the monarchy in a post-war world. This single decision set an irreversible precedent, transforming the coronation from a private mystery into a public spectacle, a global media event that every future monarch would now be expected to share with the world. While a queen navigated the glare of television cameras, another young woman faced a coronation of a very different kind, one not of state, but of society. Her name was Consuelo Vanderbilt, and her story is a gilded tragedy of duty over desire. In the glittering world of Gilded Age New York, the Vanderbilt family had mountains of new money, but craved the one thing they could not buy: the respectability of an ancient title. This hunger fell upon the shoulders of Consuelo, a gentle and artistic young woman who dreamed of a love match. Her mother, the formidable Alva-Vanderbilt, had other plans. Alva was a social strategist of military precision, and she identified the perfect target: Charles Spencer Churchill, the 9th Duke of Marlborough. He was a British aristocrat whose family name was legendary, but whose ancestral home, Blenheim Palace, was crumbling under the weight of its own upkeep. He needed a massive infusion of cash, and the Vanderbilts had it. The transaction was brutally clear: American wealth in exchange for a British title. Alva orchestrated the courtship with an iron will, locking Consuelo in her room for weeks, and even threatening to shoot the man Consuelo truly loved unless she consented to the Duke's proposal. Consuelo walked down the aisle on her wedding day in a state of visible despair, weeping openly behind her veil. This was her coronation, a grand societal event that anointed her the Duchess of Marlborough, but it was a hollow triumph. Her vast fortune, a staggering dowry rumored to be in the millions, immediately began its work, funding the restoration of Blenheim's leaking roofs and gilded staterooms. She was the savior of a palace, a fairy tale princess in the eyes of the press, but in private, she was a prisoner. Her husband was often cold and dismissive, making no secret that he had married her money, not her. He dictated her every move, her friendships, and even the books she was allowed to read. The coronation into high society demanded she produce a male heir, a duty she fulfilled, but it locked her into a life of profound loneliness within the very palace her wealth had saved. This was a coronation disaster not of public blunders, but of private anguish, where the weight of a gilded crown was measured not in jewels, but in silent tears and a broken spirit. Consuelo Vanderbilt's story of gilded confinement was not the only American narrative unfolding in the halls of British power. Jenny Jerome's entry into the aristocracy was a coronation of a different sort, a dazzling and ambiguous triumph that pulsed with both opportunity and peril. When she married Lord Randolph Churchill, the younger son of the Duke of Marlborough, she was not a weeping prisoner, but a vibrant, intelligent force of nature. Her father was a self-made financial titan, and her dowry provided immediate relief to the perpetually strained Churchill finances, effectively bankrolling Randolph's ambitious political ascent. In this transaction, Jenny secured the title of Lady Randolph Churchill, her coronation into the very heart of the British establishment. Yet the glittering society that welcomed her money was deeply skeptical of the woman herself. To the snobbish old families, she was an outsider, an American with a faint whiff of the vulgar new world about her. They whispered about her boldness, her confidence, and her startling beauty, viewing these traits not as assets, but as threats to their rigid social codes. The prejudice was a constant low hum in the background of her life, a disaster waiting to happen if she ever put a foot wrong. She navigated this minefield with stunning social grace, using her charm and intelligence to become a celebrated hostess. Her salon became the epicenter of political and cultural life, a place where powerful men gathered, and where her influence over her husband's career was both immense and widely noted. But this influence came with a cost. The very qualities that made her brilliant, her independence and her sharp mind, also cast a shadow of scandal. Rumors about her friendships with other men swirled constantly, suggesting a personal life that did not conform to the strict expectations of a Victorian lady. Her coronation was thus a paradox. She had achieved the ultimate social victory, but she lived under the microscope of a class that was always ready to condemn her for the same ambition it admired in its own sons. The financial salvation she brought the Churchills was undeniable, but the price was a lifetime of walking a tightrope, where a single misstep could transform her hard-won triumph into a very public and very British disaster. Her coronation as Queen of Hungary was a masterpiece of political theater, yet for the young Empress Elizabeth, it was a personal prison. Known affectionately as Sissy, she was just 16 years old when she entered the rigid world of the Habsburg court, a free-spirited girl suddenly crushed under the weight of imperial expectation. The coronation ceremony itself in 1854 was breathtakingly ornate, a deliberate spectacle to unite the Austrian Empire with the restive kingdom of Hungary. Sissy, with her legendary cascade of chestnut hair and delicate features, looked every inch the fairy tale queen. But beneath the layers of jeweled robes and the glittering diamond crown, she was suffocating. The very event meant to cement her power only highlighted her powerlessness. The court etiquette was a relentless, soul-crushing machine. Every minute of her day was dictated by ancient protocol, from the way she held her fan to the order in which she was allowed to speak to courtiers. Her beloved poetry books were confiscated as inappropriate. Her spontaneous nature was seen as a flaw to be corrected, her shyness as a royal insult. Her mother-in-law, the Archduchess Sophie, controlled every aspect of her life, even the upbringing of her own children, whom she was rarely allowed to see alone. The pressure to maintain her celebrated beauty became a destructive obsession. She developed severe eating disorders, subsisting on a diet of raw eggs and milk, and embarking on punishing exercise regimens that saw her spending hours each day on strenuous gymnastics and horseback riding. Her waist was cinched to a famously narrow 19 inches, a physical manifestation of the tight constraints placed upon her. The glamorous coronation portraits showed a serene and beautiful empress, but they masked a deep and consuming depression. The crown placed upon her head that day did not feel like an honor. It felt like a sentence. This coronation into imperial life was not a beginning, but an end, the start of a lifelong and ultimately tragic battle for a sliver of personal freedom. She would spend the rest of her years fleeing the very court that crowned her, traveling endlessly across Europe in a restless search for a peace she would never truly find. Her own coronation day was a model of solemn perfection, yet for Queen Mary, it was the culmination of a life rerouted by tragedy. She had not been destined for King George V. Her original engagement was to his charismatic older brother, Prince Albert Victor, the direct heir to the throne. Their match was considered ideal, but then, just weeks after the engagement was announced, Albert Victor succumbed to pneumonia during a flu pandemic. The future Queen Mary was left a widow before she was ever a wife, her royal path abruptly severed. In a twist of duty that would define her, the grieving family decided she was too perfect a candidate to lose. She was encouraged to transfer her affections to the younger, quieter brother, George, the new heir. It was a marriage born not of passion, but of profound obligation to the crown. George himself confided in his diary that he married her for his late brother's sake, a stark admission that set the tone for their entire partnership. When their coronation day arrived in 1911, it was a flawless spectacle of imperial power. Every ritual was executed with precision, every gesture measured and correct. Queen Mary, bedecked in jewels and robes, was the very picture of regal composure. Yet beneath that impeccable exterior was a woman who had completely sublimated her own identity to the needs of the monarchy. She became a living archive of royal history, dedicating her life to cataloging every piece of furniture, every painting, every artifact in the royal collection. Her personal tastes, her desires, even her manner of speaking, were all meticulously crafted to serve the institution. This was her quiet disaster, a lifelong performance of duty so complete that the woman herself seemed to vanish into the role. She was the ultimate queen consort, a pillar of unwavering support, but the cost was a profound and constant personal sacrifice, a coronation not into joy, but into a gilded cage of her own impeccable making. In the Byzantine Empire, a coronation was far more than a simple ceremony. It was a high-stakes theological tightrope walk. Every gesture, every chant, and every sacred object held the potential to ignite a political firestorm. Take the coronation of Emperor Justinian II in the year 685. His was an event of breathtaking extravagance, designed to project an image of divinely sanctioned power. Yet this very opulence masked a world of perilous ritual. The moment of crowning itself was a minefield. The Patriarch of Constantinople, the empire's leading religious figure, had to place the crown upon the emperor's head with absolute precision. A slight hesitation, a mumbled prayer, or even a disapproving glance could be interpreted as a profound theological challenge, suggesting the emperor was not truly chosen by God. This was not mere symbolism. It was a direct threat to the ruler's legitimacy. The public acclamations that followed were equally dangerous. The roar of the crowd was not spontaneous celebration, but a carefully scripted performance. Specific chants were expected, and any deviation, any cry that sounded like dissent, could be seized upon by rival factions as a sign of popular revolt. But the most volatile moment often came during the Holy Communion. For the emperor to receive the sacrament, he had to be in a state of grace, fully accepted by the Church. If the patriarch, for political or personal reasons, subtly withheld the bread and wine, or performed the rite with visible reluctance, it was a spiritual and political death sentence. It was a public excommunication in all but name, telling every noble, soldier, and citizen that their emperor was cast out from God's favor. A single misstep in this sacred pageant could transform the cathedral from a place of coronation into the epicenter of an immediate coup. The crown might be on his head, but the real battle for power was just beginning, fought not with swords in the street, but with subtle gestures in the hushed and incense-filled air. The sacred regalia, meant to be eternal, can itself become a target for annihilation. In the turbulent years of the English Civil War, the crown itself was declared a criminal. Following the execution of King Charles I in 1649, the new Republican Parliament faced a monumental question: what to do with the physical symbols of the monarchy they had just overthrown. Their answer was one of deliberate, systematic erasure. An act was passed ordering the total destruction of the medieval crown jewels, items that had been used in coronations for centuries. This was not an act of petty theft, but a calculated political statement, an attempt to melt down the very idea of kingship itself. The iconic regalia, including the crown of Edward the Confessor, was transported to the Tower of London and placed in the hands of a man named Thomas Horton, a parliamentary goldsmith. His orders were clear and brutal: to break the objects of monarchy into saleable chunks of metal and stone. The crown was wrenched apart, its gold melted into ingots, its precious gems pried out and sold off to the highest bidders. Centuries of history, worn by kings and queens at the most sacred moments of their lives, were liquidated for a little over £3,000. The ancient coronation spoon was the only major piece to survive, reportedly spared because it was already privately owned. For 11 years, England had no king and no crown jewels. The throne itself was literally gone. But when the monarchy was restored in 1660 with the return of Charles II, a new set of regalia had to be conjured from nothing. The task fell to the royal goldsmith, Sir Robert Viner. With immense speed and a budget of £12,000, he was ordered to create an entirely new collection. Working from descriptions and memories of the old treasures, Viner crafted the magnificent St. Edward's crown, solid gold and weighing nearly 5 pounds, and the glittering imperial state crown. This new collection, born from the ashes of the old, forms the very heart of the crown jewels we recognize today. The disaster was not a single day of chaos, but a years-long void, a symbolic murder of tradition that made the subsequent coronation not just a celebration, but a triumphant resurrection of the crown itself. A drenching downpour can wash away even the grandest of parades. The coronation of King George IV in 1821 was intended to be the most extravagant spectacle Britain had ever seen, a lavish celebration of a monarch who adored pomp and finery. He commissioned outrageous costumes inspired by the era of King Henry VIII, with peers of the realm decked in plumed hats and velvet cloaks. The public eagerly awaited the grand procession, a moving tapestry of wealth and power. But nature had other plans. As the procession began, the skies opened, unleashing a torrential, unrelenting rain. The magnificent plumes on the hats dissolved into sodden, drooping messes. Velvet robes became heavy, waterlogged burdens, and the intricate embroidery was ruined by muddy splashes from the streets. The public's cheers turned to shivers as they huddled under whatever cover they could find, their spirits as dampened as their clothes. What was meant to be a triumphant display of imperial glory became a comical, miserable slog, a stark lesson in the limits of human control. Extreme heat has proven just as disruptive as any storm. For military units standing at attention for hours in full dress uniform under a blazing sun, a coronation parade can become a test of sheer endurance. The heavy wool and stiff collars, designed for ceremony rather than comfort, become sweltering traps. Soldiers have been known to faint in the ranks, their bodies succumbing to the heat, while their discipline commands them to stand tall. A thick, unexpected fog can be equally disastrous, blanketing a city and obliterating the visibility of a grand procession entirely. The marching troops, the gilded carriages, the waving monarch, all vanish into an impenetrable gray mist, leaving the crowds to listen to the muffled sounds of bands and hoofbeats they cannot see. These meteorological misfortunes serve as a powerful, recurring reminder. No amount of gold, no decree from a palace, and no meticulous plan can command the clouds or hold back the sun. In these moments, the most powerful institutions on earth are forced into a posture of humility, their grand designs utterly undone by the indifferent forces of the natural world. A lifetime of waiting for the crown exacts a unique psychological toll. The longest apprenticeship in royal history belonged to King Charles III, a man who spent over 70 years as the heir apparent. His entire life was a public rehearsal for a role that might never come, a perpetual state of readiness under the world's most unforgiving microscope. Every speech, every interest, every personal misstep was analyzed not as the action of a man, but as a preview of a future king. This prolonged anticipation created a paradox. How does one prepare for an event that, by its very nature, marks the end of a parent's life? The logistical machinery for his coronation was, in fact, in a state of constant, quiet revision for decades, a plan known as Operation Golden Orb. Yet these preparations had to account for a startling reality. The new king would not be a young man. He would ascend the throne in his 70s, making his coronation the first in modern history for a monarch of such advanced age. This introduced a host of delicate challenges. The physical stamina required for the ceremony is immense. Hours of standing, kneeling, and bearing the significant weight of heavy robes and a solid gold crown. For an older person, this is not merely a test of endurance, but a genuine health risk. Every aspect of the ritual had to be reconsidered through a lens of age and well-being. Could the ceremony be shortened without sacrificing its sacred meaning? Could lighter versions of the regalia be used? The planning became a silent negotiation between unyielding tradition and the frailties of the human body. This long wait shapes an identity forged in criticism and expectation, creating a standard that is almost impossible to meet. After decades of being told what a king should be, the moment of coronation arrives not as a fresh start, but as the final judgment on a lifetime of preparation. The disaster is not in a single day of mishaps, but in the immense, invisible weight of an entire life spent in the shadow of a crown you are not yet permitted to wear. The sound of boos now mingles with the cheers. For the coronation of King Charles III, the disaster was not a physical stumble or a misplaced jewel, but a very public, deeply modern clash over the institution's soul. Republican protest groups, organized with the efficiency of a social media campaign, positioned themselves strategically along the procession route. They held signs questioning the cost of the monarchy during a severe cost of living crisis and chanted slogans for an elected head of state. Their presence was a calculated performance for the global media, a stark contrast to the orchestrated pageantry just feet away. This was not a spontaneous riot, but a planned and vocal counter-narrative designed to puncture the illusion of unanimous national support. The British government responded with a show of force that itself became a central part of the controversy. Under new and widely debated policing laws granting broader powers to prevent disruption, police officers conducted preemptive arrests. Dozens of protesters, including the leaders of the main Republican organization, were detained before the ceremony even began. Their planned demonstration, which involved nothing more than loud chants and placards, was effectively silenced on the grounds that it could cause a public nuisance. This heavy-handed tactic created a second wave of scandal, with civil liberties groups and public figures condemning the arrests as an anti-democratic overreach that undermined the very freedoms the monarchy is supposed to represent. The day's soundtrack became a perfect metaphor for a divided nation. The ancient hymns from the Abbey competing against the modern cries of dissent from the streets. This new coronation chaos reveals a fundamental shift. The threat is no longer a wobbly crown or a sudden downpour, but a pervasive, persistent question over the monarchy's relevance. The disaster unfolds not in a single catastrophic blunder, but in the slow, steady erosion of consensus, played out in real time for a global audience that is increasingly skeptical of inherited power and unearned privilege. The crown's greatest modern test is no longer bearing its physical weight, but justifying its very existence to a public that is no longer content to simply watch and wave. The very architecture built for glory can groan under the weight of its own ambition. Long before a single crown is placed, the venue itself must be prepared to host a spectacle, and history is littered with occasions where these preparations created a looming sense of danger. For the coronation of King George IV in 1821, the demand for seats among the nobility was so immense that carpenters constructed vast, temporary galleries within Westminster Abbey. These were not the sturdy stone of the abbey itself, but towering wooden structures erected to accommodate the throngs of privileged spectators. As the ceremony began, the galleries were packed to absolute capacity with lords and ladies in their most extravagant finery. Almost immediately, an unsettling sound began to rise beneath the choir's hymns, a persistent, rhythmic creaking of overstressed timber. The noise grew from a whisper to a loud, alarming groan with every collective shift of the audience. The fear was palpable and immediate. What if the structure gave way? The nobility, who had come to witness a coronation in safety and comfort, instead spent the hours glancing nervously at the shuddering wood above and below them, each creak a reminder that they were perched precariously over a long, hard drop. The sacred space was transformed into a gilded cage of anxiety, where the focus shifted from the divine right at the altar to the very real possibility of a catastrophic collapse. This was not an isolated incident. Throughout the centuries, the sheer pressure to accommodate every important figure has repeatedly pushed these ancient buildings to their limits. In other coronations, reports describe seating platforms so overcrowded that they visibly sagged, with spectators fearing the entire section might splinter and send them tumbling into the pews below. The very infrastructure designed to glorify the monarch and impress the world could, in an instant, become a lethal liability. Imagine the irony: a peer of the realm, having secured a coveted ticket to the event of the century, now calculating the distance to the stone floor and praying the carpenter's work would hold. It turned a day of celebration into a test of nerve, where the greatest threat was not a political protest or a misplaced jewel, but the terrifying physics of an overloaded balcony. A king's golden carriage can cast a very long and very dark shadow. The most infamous financial spectacle in British coronation history belongs to King George IV, a man whose personal extravagance knew any bounds. His 1821 celebration cost the modern equivalent of over £40 million, a staggering sum that funded lavish banquets, absurdly ornate costumes, and a feast featuring thousands of bottles of wine. Yet outside the palace walls, England was gripped by severe economic depression. The working classes faced brutal poverty, with widespread hunger and unemployment following the Napoleonic Wars. The contrast could not have been more stark or more damaging. The public saw not a glorious monarch, but a man gilding his own throne while his subjects struggled to afford bread. This was not merely an expensive party. It was a public relations catastrophe that cemented George's reputation as a selfish and out-of-touch ruler, creating a legacy of resentment that lingered for generations. That same tension between lavish spectacle and public need echoes powerfully today. The coronation of King Charles III came with an official price tag estimated to be over £100 million, a figure that ignited immediate and fierce debate. In a time of soaring inflation and a severe cost of living crisis, taxpayers were confronted with a simple, brutal question: why should we pay for this? The government was quick to defend the cost, framing it as a vital investment in national soft power, a global advertisement for Britain that would boost tourism and trade. But for countless citizens, this justification felt hollow. The money was not just for a ceremony, it was for unprecedented security operations, sprawling logistics, and a global media blitz, all to crown a 74-year-old man in a role he had already assumed. The spectacle intended to unite the nation instead highlighted a deep and growing divide over the monarchy's financial footprint. Every golden orb and jeweled scepter on display became a symbol not just of tradition, but of a multi-million-pound bill being footed by the public. This financial balancing act is a modern coronation's tightrope. The monarchy understands the need for austerity, for presenting a more modest and relatable face to the world. King Charles himself is known for his frugal personal habits, famously carrying his own toilet paper on trips and having his shoes resoled for years. Yet the institution of the coronation demands a show of immutable power and timeless tradition, an event that by its very nature cannot look cheap. The planners are trapped between two opposing forces. Scale it back too much, and you risk looking diminished, like a global power in decline. Spend too lavishly, and you appear reckless and detached from the everyday struggles of the people you are meant to represent. It is a no-win situation where the ceremony itself can become the disaster, not through a misplaced crown or a sudden downpour, but through the slow, steady burn of public anger over the cost. The true weight of the crown is now measured not just in gold and jewels, but in the millions of pounds it costs to put it on, and the resentment that price can sow in the hearts of the very people whose loyalty it seeks to secure. A single misplaced name on a seating chart can unravel years of careful diplomacy. The coronation of a monarch is a global stage, and every invited dignitary arrives with a keen sense of their nation's status. The order of precedence, a seemingly arcane list dictating who walks first and who sits closest to the throne, is a minefield of potential insults. At the coronation of King Edward VII in 1902, a furious dispute erupted between the diplomatic representatives of France and Russia. Each envoy believed his country deserved the position of highest honor, and the British court officials were caught in a tense, behind-the-scenes scramble to avoid causing a major international incident. The solution was a masterpiece of awkward compromise. The two men were instructed to walk side by side in the procession, a forced display of unity that satisfied no one. This was not merely about pride. It was a public test of alliances, where a perceived snub could be interpreted as a shift in foreign policy. The guest list itself is a powerful political weapon. To be invited is to be recognized as a friend. To be excluded is a very public cold shoulder. In the modern era, this dilemma becomes even more acute. Should a leader from a nation with a deeply troubled human rights record receive an invitation? What about a representative from a country with which the host nation has strained, but economically vital, relations. The decision is a high-stakes gamble. Issuing an invitation can be seen as endorsing a problematic regime, while withholding it risks alienating a powerful state and damaging trade or security talks. A coronation intended to showcase national unity can instead expose the messy, often contradictory, realities of global politics. Every RSVP is a calculated move in a grand diplomatic chess game, where the price of a single misstep is not a wobbly crown, but a fractured international relationship that could take a generation to repair. A whisper between two young princes can sometimes speak louder than any state trumpet. Amidst the somber pageantry of their mother's funeral, Prince William and Prince Harry were seen sharing a quiet, whispered exchange. In a sea of rigid protocol and profound grief, that small, unscripted moment of brotherly connection cut through the formality, offering a glimpse of the real, grieving children beneath the public roles they were forced to bear. These human interruptions are not new. Decades earlier, during his own mother's lengthy coronation, a young Prince Charles was captured on camera looking visibly bored and fidgeting in his seat. The sacred oil, the weighty crown, the ancient chants, all meant nothing to a boy for whom the ceremony was simply long and confusing. He was not a future king in that moment, but a child struggling to sit still, a universal experience that resonates with anyone who has ever been forced to endure a lengthy event. Even the most dignified royal procession is not immune to a sudden, barking critique from a corgi. The distant but distinct yap of a queen's favorite dog during a solemn outdoor ceremony can instantly transform a scene of imperial grandeur into something far more relatable and domestic. A minor wardrobe malfunction, like a hat tilting precariously in the wind or a sash slipping from a shoulder, creates a shared moment of anxiety and empathy with the person on display, not the title they hold. These are the charming disasters that no amount of planning can prevent, the tiny cracks in the royal facade through which genuine humanity shines. They remind us that inside those heavy robes are individuals who get bored, share private jokes, and are followed by the beloved, misbehaving pets they simply cannot control. In the grand tapestry of coronation history, these unscripted flashes are not flaws, but the very threads that make the monarchy feel real, forging a connection with the public that no perfectly executed ritual could ever hope to achieve. From wobbly crowns and tearful brides to fiery riots and fractured brotherhoods, the path to the throne is paved with potential calamity. These are not mere historical footnotes, but defining moments that have chiseled away at the divine image of monarchy, revealing the vulnerable human beings underneath. A forced ring, a stumbled step, or a single cry of protest can shatter centuries of carefully constructed mystique in an instant. It is in these unscripted flaws, these breaks in the perfect pageantry, that we truly see the character of the person forced to wear the crown. They must navigate not just the physical weight of gold and jewels, but the crushing expectations of an entire nation, all while the world watches for any sign of weakness. The most profound disasters are not always the grand tragedies like Cottingham Field, but also the intimate struggles, the quiet despair of a Vanderbilt, or the lonely fortitude of a King George VI. Every coronation is a live event, a high-wire act without a net, where anything can and often does go wrong, and perhaps that is the point. The possibility of disaster is the price of authenticity in a ritual built on illusion. It reminds us that leadership, even of the most hereditary kind, is ultimately a human endeavor, fraught with the same perils of error, pressure, and chance that define all our lives. Which of these royal blunders left you most astonished? Was it the sheer chaos of William the Conqueror's fiery coronation, the heartbreaking tragedy on Cottingham Field, or the very modern sound of protest at King Charles III's ceremony? Share your thoughts below.